Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about Colby Covington. Obviously, he just fought this weekend against Joaquin Buckley, losing by TKO via doctor stoppage. It was a very interesting end to the fight. Big cut on the eye. There was arguments. He could have kept going, but it really just even in the fight then, it seemed like he didn't really want to be there. He was getting destroyed by Joaquin Buckley. He could barely take him down, and when he did, he couldn't hold him down. Joaquin Buckley looked great, but we're really not talking about that today. That performance was very indicative that Colby is probably on the latter part of his career. He's most likely never going to reach an undisputed title. He's 36 and in a very competitive welterweight division with a lot of young guys. There's really not a lot of options for him unless he has a, miraculous turnaround and maybe they face him against a guy like Carlos Prates or JDM. There's many fights for him to have, but not many I think he can win. But if he never does reach that UFC gold, this is a good time to start looking back at his career a little bit, and more importantly, some of the more controversial points of his career. In the beginning, it was very clear that Colby was a cardio wrestler. He had a little bit of some interesting tricks up his sleeve when it came to the striking. Obviously, he threw spinning back fists and kept it a little exciting, but his character really wasn't there. And then all of a sudden, after facing Robbie Lawler, he just became a completely different animal, and since then it's evolved into something that's really just unbearable to watch. It's very entertaining at some points, and obviously, his whole persona of being part of the MAGA movement, being a big Trump supporter, is basically, what he's all about. The problem with that is it gets old after a while, as does everything, and he will not quit the gimmick. It's pretty well known at this point that a lot of the things he says isn't his own beliefs, and that it's just really trying to play a character almost in a WWE kind of way, which really just does not come across well at all. Everything he does is for shock value, and it's very clear to see that. The first thing he did, obviously, going back in the day, was when he was talking about after he fought Robbie Lawler, and he was talking about how Brazilians were filthy animals and how it was a dump. And it's such a, that at the time was a huge thing. He was about to get cut for the UFC, and he did what he had to do to stay in the UFC, which is why I really wanted to talk about this today. Is everything he's done in his career, all the controversies, are they in some way justified to keep his career afloat? And, in some ways I do pity him, because if you really are trying to convince the UFC to re-sign you, especially when you've made it so far in your career and you're fighting in the top 10 and they still want to drop you, that really does say a lot that they do not care. So when you have to make a turnaround like he did and say something as explosive and controversial and really kind of distasteful, it shows kind of how desperate you were. And the controversies never stopped. After that, it was just he realized what he could do with his voice, and he went on to try and add shock value to everything he says. And another example is after, of course, the altercation in Brazil, he has this altercation with Fabricio Verdum, where his coach and Verdum, Colby said they were trying to jump him, and a boomerang was thrown. It's just insane. So even some of the things he says, it tricks some of the people on the active roster, because he's done such a good job at saying these outlandish comments that even though it's a well-known fact that it's not reflective of his true character, he still manages to get into the head of industry professionals, and a legend like Fabricio Verdum, and it doesn't really help. Going into any one of his fights, something has been said, and the most recent one of that, of course, was with Leon Edwards, saying his father was seventh layer FL. Whatever he said was just, it's another one of those moments where coming into the fight it was very hyped up. He didn't really need to go over the limit of what he was saying, but he did. And of course it made for, a lot of people to buy the fights, but he lost a ton of respect. It was a gamble on his part, because if he were to lose that fight, which he did, he would have lost so much stock. and which he did, and people would have clowned him for months to come for the rest of his career, which is what they are doing. People have turned on him. They've turned away from the whole, oh, he doesn't care. He doesn't care about what anyone thinks about him. He's going to say what he wants and he's going to win. The problem is he's not winning. You know, Colby Covington was a very good fighter, an extremely good wrestler, some of the best cardio we've ever seen in the UFC. He gave us a legendary fight against Kamaru Usman. But he's at a point in his career where his trash talk is not being backed up by his performances. And it's an unfortunate reality for him. So, other examples, he's still fighting with the media. And I don't know why he does that. It just is continuously making him more unpopular. I remember he told that one reporter a couple months ago, maybe a year ago, the overweight one, to do some push-ups. Just picking on people, the bully mentality, which could work if you had done it well and if you were winning fights, but he just wasn't, and he still isn't. And of course, now people point that out and really just have a hard time taking him serious. Of course, talking about all that, is it fair to say that, as I said earlier, he's doing all this because he feels that he needs to keep his career? It's an interesting thing because it was working so well, and it all draws back to the same point. Do you really feel like you need to keep doing this, Colby? Because it's very clear that you're on the latter stage of your career. If you wanted people to join you and to get behind you in support of your fights, at this point it's time to pivot it. And it's just very interesting to see how long he's clinging on to this character. I almost feel bad because looking at other fighters and anyone who's talked about Colby in not such an aggressive sense, people who haven't had altercations with him, there's numerous accounts of him being very nice outside of the cage. There's videos of him talking to fans and being very kind. There's really none of that bully mentality when the cameras aren't on him, which makes it all that more frustrating because when everyone knows you're playing a character, it becomes very frustrating to watch you basically just lie to everybody. And doing these things that are just so out of pocket becomes so cringe to a point where I really don't get it. And I feel like most fans are at a point where they just don't get it, and it's a great opportunity to make fun of him and to hate on him. And he's a professional fighter, and he's been doing it for such a long time that it's time to hang up. So just looking at some other instances, of course, going back to the feud with Jorge Masvidal, something that really propelled him to being a star of pay-per-view after the Usman fights, was a great opportunity for him. And the beef was never really fully described and made clear as to why it happened. Maybe there was some jealousy on Jorge's side after the success of Colby, or there was rumors that Colby had not paid a coach or something along those lines. But it really was never, even in situations like that where true character can be revealed behind the scenes, there was really not a lot that painted Colby as a villain. It was just a friendship that had gone sour, I guess, which was a weird way to sell a fight, but it did fantastic. And of course it was an opportunity for Colby to beat up kind of an older vet who had a lot of damage on him and made it look very easy. It wasn't exactly a stunning fight. I think Colby got dropped at one point, which is really the only exciting part. But as to his fight style, he was clinging him against the fence and cardio wrestling, which is what he does on these big pay-per-view cards. Of course, he had those two very exciting fights with Kamaru Usman, but it was because he really couldn't do anything with him. He really couldn't out-wrestle Kamaru, so the only option with him was to strike. And I will give him credit. He did try to strike with Joaquin Buckley, and he definitely just didn't give up in the beginning rounds of the fight. But he really just didn't stand any chance. His age was showing. He just kept getting clipped, and obviously the damage accumulated on his face stopped the fight. And what is next? What's next for him? What does he do now? I think this guy. I honestly think Colby is a fantastic fighter. And if he really wants a career, rejuvenation, he could take on some of these guys, these up and comers, these hungry up and comers in the division. Maybe Ian Gary. Of course, that would be huge because Colby could play on his character again. And another option for him. I've always felt like Colby is a very small welterweight. He said it. He doesn't cut a lot of weight himself. If he's telling the truth on that, it's hard to say. Obviously, maybe going along with his character, he's lying. But I've always thought he would be a great lightweight. And I think there are some great fights. Obviously, the Dustin Poirier fight, because there's so much beef there, so much trash talk that Colby's done. Another thing that's very hard to justify. But if he really wants to keep using this character that he's built up, and is kind of clearly fake at this point, he should be backing it up. If he's going to be calling out smaller guys, he should be fighting Dustin Poirier, or he should be, fighting the young guys in the welterweight division. At this point, keeping going for shock value comments on people is just, it's not going to work. It's not going to rejuvenate his career. It's definitely not going to make him a better fighter. And I do think that he still has more to give to the sport, but I don't think it's going to be in the form of an undisputed title, and I don't think he's going to get up there again. But, do I think this character that he's made over these past couple years is justified? It's really within the eye of the beholder. Some of the comments he's made, just for example, about Matt Hughes, was pretty terrible. And I don't know who writes it for him, and I don't know who kind of supplies this whole idea that he has to say things like stay off the track, like tracks like Matt Hughes, or attacking members of the media, going after Leon Edwards' father. I don't know really who is writing this for him, but just from an outsider fan perspective, it's time for Colby to have a persona change. I think he should just drop it entirely and really just, go in on the fact that he was never really, that guy. He never really had those beliefs. I'd like to see him come back a little more chill mentality, because he's established himself as a very competent fighter in his division, and he's a face that many people recognize. The UFC wouldn't just cut him because he was boring all of a sudden. It's not like it's gonna go, people are gonna forget who he is, but I feel like a total change of character is needed. And I do feel like that he is, in a sense, misunderstood, because it almost seems cringe to him when he says some of these things. And I've felt sad a couple times when he's had these big moments of controversy and he's leaving maybe after a loss and the media is interviewing him and he just looks so drained that he has to keep putting up this kind of persona, which is something you really just don't want to see in the UFC. That's such a WWE type thing, and it's very easy for those guys to do because they can separate themselves from those characters. It's an open fact that everyone in the WWE plays a character up to, sort of a character, like almost like a caricature. And in the UFC, it's been the opposite. This is real. This is the realest sport you can get. And of course, people are going to act like, hyped up for their fights and try and sell their fights. But when you're just clearly for years and years just kind of part of something that makes you uncomfortable and is like opposite of what you stand for as a person, or opposite as how you act in private, it's very clear to people. So I do think Colby is at a very awkward point in his career. What I think he needs is to change his character. I feel like he needs to drop everything he's been doing for basically his entire career. I think it's time for him to maybe either move down a weight class or fight someone he can win. And it's just something that was very clear this entire fight week. The hate on him wasn't as much this fight week against Joaquin Buckley. And of course, it's going to follow him because he lost. But it would have been a lot worse if he went into this week trash talking to the extent that he did in the past and then lost. So after watching this fight night, which was fantastic top to bottom, I think it's pretty clear that Colby almost knew that he was at a point in his career where, he might not be able to back up the trash talk. And I think that's a great realization for him. I think he's still a fantastic fighter. I think he's capable of putting on very entertaining fights in 2 divisions. I think he would be a great lightweight, and I think there's great fights for him at welterweight. But unfortunately, he's kind of tainted his character with all these things he's done throughout the year. What do you guys think? Do you think it's time for Colby to make a change? Comment it down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.